Good evening. I'm James Siniak, and I'm your Libertarian candidate for the U.S. Senate race. We have a lot of exciting things going on and some huge events to announce. We have a rally on August 27th. I would love to see you all there, and that's in Jeffersonville. Additionally, we have online town halls every Wednesday, so thank you for joining in. Tonight, we have a very special guest, Josh from Kosciuszko County. He's going to talk a little bit about what's going on in his race. He's our first return guest, and I'm sure he has some updates since a few months ago. Always welcome Chris Groff, producing behind the scenes, and he'll give your questions. This is an online town hall, so we welcome any questions. You can put live on your question, and we'll bring you on to the actual video, or you can just type it in, and we'll respond via typing as well. Thank you guys for joining me. Thanks, Josh, and thanks, Chris, for coming on as well. Josh, what's going on up in Kosciuszko?
Oh, more of the same, I suppose. Continuing to work with our local libertarian groups and get the word out about our wide slate of candidates coming up this election cycle. This is our first cycle with Kosciuszko County being an affiliated county. So this has opened up a lot of opportunities for us to be on the ballot. And we're taking full advantage. So residents within Warsaw and within Kosciuszko County should have options all up and down their ballot. We've got folks at the township level, at the county level, city level, house level, state, even federal. So we're hoping to give them as many options as possible for those who are dissatisfied with the current two-party systems.
Awesome. I love what you guys are doing up there. Remind us what you are running for and what that entails.
Sure. So I'm the candidate on the ballot for Indiana House District 22. That comprises most of Kosciuszko County and a little bit of Wabash. And much like the House of Representatives that we're familiar with at the federal level, there's one at the state level as well. And that's the seat that I'm looking to represent. And basically, it's just the legislative body at the state level. So trying to advocate for the constituents in my district and make sure that their concerns and their priorities are voiced down at the state house.
And as a reminder, you can enter questions either for Josh's race or myself. Josh, tell us what is different about you than your opponents. What makes you different? What makes you attractive with the votes?
Well, that's an excellent question, and it speaks to something that I've been struggling with a bit. So maybe I'll out myself a bit, maybe on your town hall here. So up until now, I've focused my campaign on the issues. I think I have stances that are very much in line with most of my constituents when it comes to things like educational freedom and opposition to sort of one size fits all mandates, similar things like that. A strong focus on sound fiscal policy. But really, if you drill down to it, I think there's one significant difference that separates me from my primary opponent, which is Craig Snow on the Republican ticket. And in my perspective, I think that there was some overtures behind the scenes, let's say, to help ensure his position in the state house after this election. And my personal opinion is that he's hoping to coast in on those efforts and not really try to earn the votes or genuinely represent the people of our district, but rather just be another voice in favor of whatever the establishment party down in Indy has to say. I personally don't feel like we're going to get quality representation, and I would like to offer that up as what I can offer different than what they're going to get on that ticket.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you could follow the money, right? So the GOP in Indiana actually sent Snow a large amount for his primary. So he's definitely an establishment guy. But you probably know more details about that as well.
Yeah, and I've hesitated to tell the story in depth because I don't necessarily want to make it a campaign about throwing shade, but the general sense is in many ways kind of the fix is in or had been from the get-go. This is what we were concerned about all the way back when they were talking about redefining the districts and grouping people together. And it's unfortunate to say that our fears, I think, were realized. He seems like a nice enough guy. I'm sure he's not going to completely sell us up the river, but I also don't think that he's genuinely advocating for the members of his district. I think that it's just going to be whatever the majority says plus one vote.
Now, I know this is a redrawn district, so the votes, it's never been, there's nothing to base it on, but is this really expected to be a Republican wipeout, no Democrat has a real shot at it, or is the Democrat coming in strong?
We do have a Democrat candidate on the ticket. I haven't seen a lot of activity out of that campaign. Now, we have once a month, we do a First Friday event in downtown Warsaw. I did see that the Democrat candidate, which is Dee Moore, had a booth set up for that, and I saw some signage and whatnot. So they are starting to step in, but that's the first activity I've seen out of that campaign. As for the Republican side, I mean, they basically, after the primary, it was all, high fives and pats on the back. I think as far as they're concerned, it's job done. I wouldn't even be surprised if we see little to nothing out of that campaign going up to the election.
I mean, up there traditionally it tends to be pretty secure Republican, so that tends to be the primary. Actually, was probably the more contested race. We'll see if that holds true, especially with you jumping in. I think this is the first time the Libertarians running that for that. Not just because it's redrawn, but even in that area for Indiana House. Yep. So that'll be another interesting dynamic to this as well.
Absolutely.
We did get one pre-question on Twitter, and it was from Mama C, and it addressed how I was going to specifically reduce spending in Washington, D.C. And we talk a lot about the balanced budget and how we want to make sure that our money is not wasted. We talk a lot about deficit spending and making sure the Fed's not just printing money. But she wanted to know a little bit more specifically. And so these are some things I've addressed along the campaign trail, and I really want to bring it to light again. But the military has an astronomical amount of waste within it, and it's one of the first areas that I really think we can target without even losing any defense. We'll still have a strong defense, but when we the numbers just statistically show that we don't need to spend as much on military as we do. In addition to that, I don't think we should have as much foreign aid as we do. We need to take care of what's happening in America first, take care of those who are paying taxes first. And so that's another area I would really like to address, is how much aid we're sending out. The third area is when we talk about subsidizing different parks in different communities. I really believe that should be done at the local level. It should be done at the state and the counties. There's a lot of subsidizing that happens. And really, if we remove that from the federal level, we can also reduce a lot of spending on the federal level. But this is also a great opportunity to mention fair tax. I would love to see a whole tax overhaul, and fair tax is a great way to bring that about. So those are all great ways, and I appreciate that question from Mama C. Chris Groff, what else do we have going on right now?
We don't have anything coming in at the moment. I know the thing that's really hitting on people's mind is still inflation.
The polls show that it's the number one issue, both in Indiana and all across America. And when I look at both especially on the Senate level, when I look at both the Republican and the Democrat, and both have said they're going to continue their spending habits, I see no change in that area. I'm the only candidate that actually wants to reduce the budget, wants a balanced budget. And it's actually interesting. Tom McDermott had an interview on WIBC today with Abdul, and Abdul was interviewing him, and he actually mentioned that, or Tom McDermott mentioned that if conservatives are really looking for a change in spending, to look at the Libertarian candidate. So that's interesting. The Democrat was even saying Todd Young is not responsible with the budget. So if you really want a difference in Washington, D.C., vote differently. Josh, how do you think inflation affects the state level as your race?
I think my race is going to be like many others. The prickly bit about inflation is it affects everyone. It really only benefits the government, and only at the Cantillon effect level. It dramatically impacts everyone else negatively, and it's perhaps the largest hidden tax that we experience, and it's just devastating. It makes people who are paycheck to paycheck, it makes everything they buy more expensive. People who've tried to cobble together some money and save, diminishes the value of all the money they've socked away. It's something that we should be deeply ashamed of, and frankly, it's a crime against the American people, the level we've let it get to. And to have our recent activity out of the legislature pass yet another spending bill to then amplify the amount of tax enforcement, and then have the audacity to call it the the Inflation Relief Act, I think it's like cartoon supervillain levels of out of touch.
Well, that's how you fix inflation, right? With more inflation.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's Washington D.C.'s insanity, and really that's what it is. It's insane. Way before any of this was occurring, I looked at what was happening in Washington, and I said we need fiscal sanity, and it's more truth even now. You look at it, and it's literally insane how they're combating inflation. I did want to give a shout out to Tim Cotton on here from St. Joseph Libertarian Party. He's the chair up there. He's been doing a lot of work. They're a new affiliate, and they're really pushing up there. So thanks for coming on and watching. We may have lost Chris Groff on a technical issue, so I'm not sure what happened there, but that's all right. We still have Josh. Josh, I wanted to ask you, the State House just passed a bill with giving Hoosiers back, I think it was $200. What's your take on that bill?
It was 250. They
Yeah,
dropped it.
yeah.
200.
First of all, get it right. It's 250.
No, they
Well-
dropped it. It used to be 250. They
So-
dropped it down to 200.
Right. So that's what I thought is they dropped it. So originally it was 250
Oh.
and then they dropped it to 200.
Honestly, I'll plead ignorance there. I hadn't even looked at it because, frankly, I think that whole process is frankly insulting. I think it's at best a cheap PR move, and at worst a giant waste of money.
Do you want me to
Anybody
make
who's
it
worked
worse
with
for you?
what's that?
Do you want me to make it worse for you?
I'm
do.
sure. Lay it on me.
So what this is coming out of is the $6.1 billion. What's the word? I just lost it.
Surplus.
The
Surplus.
general fund or the rainy day fund, right?
Yeah, the $6.1 billion surplus. And I don't have the math in front of me, but it was something around that was only going to cut in like maybe 1.5-ish billion of that 6.1 if they sent it to everyone that was on our census.
Well, I was talking to a voter yesterday at Old Settlers. Old Settlers is an awesome event held by the Lions Club in Morgan County. So it was a lot of fun being there. But I was talking to a voter there, and they were telling me, they were saying, look, this is almost an insult. I don't even need the $200, but really, what can we do better for our state with the 200? And, for those who do need it, they need more than 200. And it was just an interesting take that they're like, this is almost an insult, no matter how you look at it.
Oh, so I'm going to beat on this drum because this is right where I live, right? It's fiscal policy, and specifically terrible fiscal policy, right? So what got us here is we've created a tax structure that's generated a substantial surplus. Okay, that's all well and good. Now, if you ask me the proper resolution to that, right? Everything with fiscal policy is about balancing around a nominal. So we've taxed to the extent where we've grossly exceeded the need and we're building up a surplus. The appropriate response to that is to address the tax code and revise it such that we give direct relief to all taxpayers, and then we can consume a slight portion of that surplus. And then if we consume it at such a rate that it becomes a concerning or it might pose an issue, then we readjust the tax rate. That's how you give money back to Hoosiers. Anybody who's worked with a business, anybody who knows payroll, to go through and administer checks and cut them out to all the people across the state of Indiana is going to be a massive expense. And this is, I've been trying to formulate the analogy, but it's sort of like if you have a toxic employer who has you work 80 hours of unpaid overtime, and then they give you like a $5 Starbucks gift card and say, good job. Like to me, that is this scenario, right? It's not a raise. It's not an adjustment to your benefits. It's not even a bonus. It's a slap in the face, and it's a waste of money.
It is for sure. And the problem is we have all of this surplus, and yet our roads are still terrible.
Yep. Well, and I think the surplus is a good thing. So this is one of my mottos of my campaign is to let Hoosiers lead. And I think the surplus is an example of that. There's a lot of states in the union that are not fiscally solvent, not even by a long shot. Most of them are hanging on by a thread, much like the federal government. Indiana, for the flaws that it does have, has done a reasonable job of managing our finances relative to the rest of the class. And I think that there's some examples that can be taken there as lessons learned for other states. What I don't think that we should do is seek to further expand that surplus. We clearly have enough to cover our basic expenses and operate for some period of time. And especially in this environment of inflation and uncertain economic times, if there was ever an opportunity to reduce the tax burden on Hoosiers and try to put more money back in their pockets, not by a check, not by a payroll distribution, but by reducing the cost of their goods and services and living going forward, this is the time. And we're not seeing any efforts to that effect out of anyone down at the State House.
100%. And it looks like Tim put it best in we are victims of domestic abuse by the IRS and our county councils.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So it's interesting because as I'm running for federal level, I actually get a lot of state questions, Josh, and this is one that comes up all the time because it does affect federal, but honestly affects state even more, and that's the gas tax. So the federal level, I believe it's only 8, maybe 9 cents on the gallon, which is still too much. But in the state of Indiana, I believe we're up to 68 or 69 cents per gallon. What is your take on this? Because everybody's asking me, and I said, yes, on the federal level, I'll work to get rid of that 8 to 9 cents. But when we're talking about roads, this was supposed to be designated to roads. Now the money just goes to the general fund, and it actually doesn't go directly to roads. Thoughts? What would you do?
I mean, there's a lot to cover with that. So one, this was intended way back when, my understanding, to peg the cost of road maintenance towards sort of like a usury tax, right? Basically, if you're buying gasoline regularly, that means you're using the roads more often, so you should pay a higher share of the upkeep and maintenance, which is, from a philosophical standpoint, I somewhat understand that idea. What we've unfortunately done is kind of gone off the rails with it. So one, it's entirely too high on its face. Two, as you mentioned, it's not even necessarily bespoke towards road maintenance, but instead filters into some general fund, giant pit where everything else is consumed and money disappears from. And it's just prohibitive. And then on top of that, they've got it pegged to inflation, so it increases, and it has provisions that increase automatically without a vote in front of your legislature. So there's several different dimensions of that are a problem. I would love to say that we can fix it, but I have not seen any appetite out of that from Indianapolis. That's something I would be happy to put forward, but brass tacks, as a third-party candidate in a state with a supermajority, what bills I put forward are not going to be welcomed with open arms. I'll put it that way. So the best I can hope to do in my seat is to either add amendments to existing bills or essentially challenge party leadership there to address this issue, which I think, again, it falls right in line with the cash return that we just talked about, right? This is an obvious opportunity to do something that's going to meaningfully impact the life of every single Hoosier. And when we look to our current elected leadership, it's just crickets. And it's unacceptable.
So this brings up another great question that I get on the federal level, and I believe it applies to you as well, obviously at a different level. But the question I get a lot is, how do you plan on working across the aisle? And so working on these state issues, you said it's going to be hard to pass your philosophical ideas of what's best for Hoosiers. How do you plan on getting around that, working with even Democrats and obviously Republicans, because we do have a supermajority in Indiana. So it's essential that we work with both. What's your thoughts on how we do negotiations, work with, or do we not work with? Do we just take a stand?
It's tough to say, and it's going to depend a little bit on the makeup of who gets down there after this election cycle. From what I've seen of some of the races, some liberty-minded Republicans have been squeezed out, but others have filled in the gap. So I'm hoping there's a small sort of Freedom Caucus-oriented group that I could work with while down in Indy on the Republican side. I think there's some Democrats who would be willing to take more moderate positions if it could help them get some legislation across the supermajority's desk. And frankly, if everything else fails, then I just intend to be a fly in the ointment. The interesting thing about Indiana, especially, we're Republican supermajority, and a lot of our Republican candidates, when they go to their district, they campaign like libertarians. They talk a big game about reducing taxes and fiscal responsibility and small government and all these things that all sorts of Hoosiers love to hear. And then they go down to Indy, and as I mentioned, that they have no interest in reducing taxes, passing these different provisions that would cause some relief for people. So, worst case scenario, I guess we just go scorched earth and start playing people's campaign videos and say, this is the amendment you put in this law. It's going to raise taxes, and here's your campaign where you said you're going to lower them. How are you going to square that to your voters and call them to account and hope that their constituents do the same?
So I have another shout out. Your county chair is here, Cassie, and she actually brings up a good point. She says, I'd rather pay a gas tax than pay property taxes. I would have to agree with her on this. Property tax to me is one of the most evil taxes there are. And my philosophical view on this is, look, if you manage to pay off your house and the government can take it after you not paying taxes, and the taxes being a ridiculous amount, you never really own your property. And I actually believe that's an infringement on our rights. We do have the right to own property. So to me, property tax is maybe the most evil tax we have. What's your thoughts on that specific statement? Do you agree with your chair? Any disagreements?
Big time. Matter of fact, so Cassie and I have been sort of workshopping something, and this is a little bit of like a fun pet project for me. So I'll bounce it off of you two, and you can tell me your thoughts. So first of all, I agree. The fact that you never truly own your property is an affront to everything that America stands for, in my opinion. It's despicable. And it's the biggest threat, from what I can gather, to retired people on a fixed income, right? Folks whose house maybe cost them $30,000, forever ago, and they've paid it off quite some time before, but their property taxes just keep increasing year over year over year, but their Social Security or their retirement or their pension remains the same. I like the idea of once you pay off your house, you own it. However, I think when we're talking about brass tacks and actual actionable policy, it's important to try to figure out, you sort of red team it if you're familiar with like InfoSec, right? You try to pick it from the other end and pick it apart. And the concern with once you pay off your property, you own it, you don't have to pay property taxes. Well, really, that could be viewed as heavily benefiting the wealthy, right? Because the wealthy are going to have a far easier time paying off their property. So if you've got a $1 million house somewhere and you pay it down quick and then it knocks out your property tax, well, you've just put a big chunk of money back in the pockets of the highest income earners in your district or in your area. So something I've been kicking around, and Cassie and I have talked about this a little bit. I'm curious your thoughts on this. But in Indiana, we have a homestead exemption for your house. So your primary residence, if it's your main house, you get a break on your property taxes. That's cool. I like that. We also have some breaks in there for senior citizens. So I kind of want to tweak that a little bit, but I want to try to address this issue of people on a fixed income losing their property due to property taxes. So here's the proposal, okay? Your primary residence, once you and your spouse or whoever's in your sort of family unit have both hit retirement age, you qualify for an exemption. The exemption is pegged to the median home value in your township, county. I'm not quite sure what the right size parcel is, but some sort of representative sample that's reasonably large. And so that way it can't be like, oh, all the residents around this one lake get, a massive break. It's got to be distributed across various income levels. But the median household value in your area, essentially your property taxes are offset by that amount. So if you're John Q. median household owner, your property taxes are essentially negated. If you have a property valued less than the median, your property taxes are also totally eliminated. Now, if you happen to have a very nice house, right, you're 50% or double or well above the median, then whatever the difference is, you're still on the hook for that property tax. So if you've got a multi-million-dollar lake home, I believe that you can afford to pay some property tax on that. If you're living in a standard 3-2 in a so-so neighborhood and you're retired on a fixed income, I think that should be your property.
I actually, with my initial thoughts, is this is a better proposal than some. And here's one reason why. Because what we see right now is them just continuing to increase property value, and there's no max to it. So if you're looking at the median, if they're continuing to do that, it actually doesn't benefit them at all. Where
Exactly.
this actually, I believe, create a more fair system of what your house is valued at. Courtney brought up a point. Her first question was cap property tax for life of ownership or abolish. And there's a couple of philosophy views on this. I'm not for property tax at all, but we do have to look at some of the things that property tax pays for. It pays for schools, it pays for your firefighters, it pays for a lot of local things. So whatever we do to adjust that tax, if we do abolish it, we do still have to make sure that some of those community things are taken care of. I absolutely believe that we still need to fund a lot of things in our communities. I just believe that we can do it differently and not have people losing their property over it. I would love to look at Josh's written proposal on this. I'm sure it's not written yet, but this would be an amazing thing to look at. And I think it actually has a lot of solutions within it. But yeah, thanks, Courtney, for your input there.
You're kind of stealing my job here, James.
I just want to
taking over.
I want to tag in quickly to Courtney because I ultimately agree. There's a couple caveats to that. So capping the rate, we actually in our state constitution the rate is capped, but as James mentioned, the rate is capped, and so the response is to just constantly revalue your home at a higher rate.
Which is exactly what's happening now.
And that's what we've seen, and that's what everyone's getting hit by. So it certainly sounds good in theory, but again, you have to sort of try to game out these solutions from both sides, and there's ways to game that. So that's why I think tying it to the median value creates sort of a dimensionless number, right? That value is going to fluctuate relative to everyone's home, so it's very hard to manipulate that to target one group or another. And in terms of abolishment, I'm with you, James. I would prefer there to be no property tax. However, we have a large number of structures that are currently funded that way. And this is a big thing that I think libertarian folks get tripped up on. They look at sort of our aspirational goals and they say, well, that's unrealistic. Or they look at us taking incremental approaches and they say, well, that's not the aspirational goal. And it's one of those things where you can't just blast out property tax without, completely destroying fire, police, education, all these type things. I think there's ways we could fund them effectively without it, but you have to sort of adjust all the different levers in unison. You can't just turn one switch completely off and everything else keeps going.
So at the very beginning of my run, and I even had a contested primary, but all along I said what my run is for U.S. Senate is an incremental approach to libertarian principles. And the idea is that we can't accomplish everything that libertarians want overnight unless you literally have a revolution. And I get hit by some libertarians saying I'm not extreme enough, but my thought is we can do this civilly and we can take an incremental approach, bring more freedom, still fund some of the things that we need in our communities. And I definitely believe that an incremental approach is what we need. And Josh, what you're doing on the state level is exactly that. So I appreciate that philosophy. And I believe that's actually how we end up getting more things done.
So I'm going to circle back here a little bit. Tim brings up a good point about Democrats arguing that it'll still benefit the rich and promote generational property ownership.
Well, that is a good point, and frankly, there's no way to get around it, right? The jump from renter to owner is massive, and there's not a whole lot from a policy perspective you can do without the best way to put this is the only way you could manipulate it to a degree such to offset it, it would require so much interference as to create way more problems. So the best thing that we can do is minimize barriers to home ownership. And one of those barriers is, with our current framework, basically the price of homes constantly increases. So every generation successively has to work harder and take out more debt in order to buy homes. If we can remove or eliminate the incentives that cause that behavior to happen, right? We peg taxes to the median home value. Now there's not really any benefit to increasing the valuation of your home because it doesn't really change the amount of property taxes levied against it. It all stays relative. So that reduces expansion. If James gets in and we can start cutting down inflation, I mean, that is one of the single biggest factors that is preventing migration from lower class to middle class out of anything that we can possibly change.
So I'll use inflation for just a brief second because you brought it up and it's such a great point. But for those who don't understand what inflation is, it's literally a tax on the middle class and below that's saying your money's not worth as much, and it really affects you at a more astronomical rate than it does somebody who's wealthy. So when the Democrats like to talk about taxing the rich, taxing millionaires, taxing billionaires, what they don't talk about is how inflation is the tax on the middle class and the upcoming classes. So if we're really truly looking for solutions, we really need to first look at inflation and solve that issue.
I mean, that's the linchpin of everything, realistically. I mean, everyone's heard the stories, right? Your grandparent or your parent. Oh, I remember when gas was, 13 cents a gallon, right? The reason why it's not 13 cents a gallon is inflation. That's it. What's preventing you from being able to afford gasoline relative to those people is inflation. Same thing with housing, same thing with food, clothing, literally every single thing you buy. It's not hard to find all sorts of charts about the purchasing power of a dollar 100 years ago versus today, and how cartoonishly small it is relative to that time. Uh, you know, all these tax the rich and whatnot. It's just pure economic illiteracy, really. And then with this recent spate of the massive hiring of IRS agents that say, "Oh, we're really going to get them now," y- you know, yeah, okay, I guess. The trouble with rich people is they can afford CPAs and tax lawyers and other people who know the code better than the IRS to ensure they never pay taxes. Ultimately, all this stuff always ends up hitting the folks who are self-filing on a 1040 and trying to get the earned income credit, or who have a side hustle, or who, do
Or who
DoorDash
accidentally
or
had too
Uber.
much Venmo to them because now we're looking at everything that's 600
Yeah,
or above.
yeah. I hope you don't go out to dinner with your friends often and split the bill, because somebody's going to be digging through that and asking you to claim that as income, even though it was their share of drinks last night.
Speaking of that, I actually spoke to my someone I spoke to is very big into tax code and all of that, and they said anytime you take those Venmos, the easiest way to fight it is to always put reimbursement after, because they cannot tax you for a reimbursement. So anything I send on Venmo is some sort of reimbursement. I don't care if I was just sending somebody $20 just to be nice. I'm reimbursing you for something.
So that is one way that you can help get your around that, and I would definitely recommend doing that. I've seen that recommendation as well. But when these laws are designed to affect the everyday Hoosier who's having issues with their wallet already, and they're trying, the side hustle was mentioned, garage sales, those type of things. Well, we
Yep.
moved a lot to Venmo, we've moved a lot to Cash App, and now the IRS is looking at ways to monopolize on that and bring in more money, bring in more revenue. So it's really intriguing how these taxes are really affecting the middle class, and how it's absolutely hurting us, and nobody's really discussing it from a middle class to a upcoming class perspective of what can we do better. They're just looking at rhetoric that means absolutely nothing.
I couldn't agree more. The general trend, I mean, this last couple of weeks, for what I've seen out of Washington, it just seems like open disdain for working class people in middle America, and it's shocking to me. I would think if folks were paying attention, not a single one would find their way back. But we'll probably see a decent return rate after this election, and it's what do you do?
All right, so we are getting on to a little past the 30-minute mark. Josh, tell us how we can find out more about your campaign, how we can donate to it, how we can support you, if we wanted to, and if we're in your area, how we can volunteer. What area does your campaign cover? I know it's District 22, but can you name some of the counties, some of the areas that it covers?
Sure thing. So District 22 is primarily Kosciuszko County. It's going to be all sorts of towns there, a little bit of Wabash County as well, the northern part, but it's got Silver Lake, Claypool, Warsaw, all the way over to Etna Green, up to Milford, Leesburg, all those areas. It includes the Chapman Lake area. It cuts off a bit before like North Webster and Syracuse, but most of Kosciuszko County and a bit of Wabash. I've got a campaign website. It's votevergils.com. Vergils, just like my last name there, all one word. You can find out a little bit about policy, a little bit of donation activity there. Hop on Facebook. I like to stir things up there and post stuff every now and again. And yeah, just love the chance to have your support, have your vote. We do have some upcoming events here in our area that I'll try to make sure I get everyone informed of. Of course, First Friday, we go out for every one of those that we possibly can. So stop by and see us there. We also have a big Get Out the Vote activity coming up, which I want to make sure I get the right date on that, because that is a huge
September
one.
24th.
Yes. It is the 24th. It will
I'll,
be in Warsaw.
I'll actually
And
be coming up for that as well. So I'm excited to be going up. And it's also my birthday weekend, just random fact.
excellent. Well, remind me, we'll get a cake or something going at the headquarters there for the Get Out the Vote event.
Well, thanks, Josh, for always coming on, being willing to come on and as a guest. I know this one was a little bit last minute, but we enjoy having the discussions. And when it comes to fiscal policy, you're very intelligent, very smart, and I would love to see you get in and represent our state, because this is what we need. We need reasonable approaches. We need someone who's level-headed and understands the fiscal policies. So, as always, thank you. For those who are looking at the Senate race, consider a fresh modern approach in November. We are full steam ahead. We're trying to raise some money for billboards. So we definitely appreciate donations at www.ceniac4senate.com. And as I mentioned earlier today, we do have a huge rally down in Jeffersonville. And that's on August 27th. Tanya, the Congress candidate down there, will be joining me. And I have exciting news that we do have an MC today. And for those who are familiar with the name Brian Nichols, he's going to be coming down and MCing that. So that will be an awesome addition to that rally. And we do have other guests that are being planned and are to be announced very, very soon. So look out on Facebook and Twitter for that announcement. I'm super hyped about this. You are not going to want to miss that rally, no matter where you are in this state, because there's going to be some exciting things happening. So again, August 27th, we're hyped about that. Consider that fresh modern approach to Washington, D.C., and I look forward to meeting you at your local community and your local fairs as we continue to campaign across the state. As always, thanks, Chris Groff, for producing this and letting us talk about all kinds of things that will help our state and help Hoosiers. So, yeah, thanks for listening in.